So we're now going to look at the quadratic formula as a way of solving quadratic equations. As you probably recall, the quadratic formula is based on a quadratic equation that reads ax squared plus bx plus c. This tells us that the a is the number that sits in front of the x squared, the b is the number in front of the x, and the c is the number that sits by itself. And so the quadratic formula, x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Now, often students have a difficult time remembering the quadratic formula. So there are lots of different ways to go about memorizing that quadratic formula. One such way is to sing it. So I'm going to go ahead and show you this quick video, and hopefully this will help you in remembering your quadratic formula.
X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. X is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a.
Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and we're going to move on, and we're going to look at a particular part of the quadratic formula called the discriminant. The discriminant can be used to determine how many solutions there are to your quadratic equation before you work it out. So the discriminant is the part of the quadratic formula, b squared minus 4ac. So if you look back at your formula for just a second, your discriminant is the part underneath the square root. And so our rules for using the discriminant say that if that discriminant value is greater than 0, we expect that the problem is going to have two real solutions. If the discriminant is equal to 0, we expect the problem to have one real answer. And if the discriminant is less than 0, we have 0 real solutions and 2 imaginary solutions. So we're going to look at a couple of examples. We'll start with the problem 3x squared plus 2 is equal to 4x. Now remember that in order to use the quadratic formula, you first need to have your equation in the proper form, which means that it needs to be set equal to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract this 4x from both sides of the equation. So this is going to give me 3x squared minus 4x plus 2 is equal to 0. I usually encourage students to, before you start the quadratic formula, to make a list of what your a, b, and c values are. So your a value, remember, is the number sitting in front of the squared term. So that's going to be 3. Your b value is the number sitting in front of the x. So that's going to be negative 4. And it's important to take the sign with it. So it is a negative 4. And your c value is the constant. So that's going to be your 2. Now, before I do the quadratic equation, I want to check the discriminant. So remember that the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. And so I'm going to calculate this part first. So plugging in for the b, I'm going to have negative 4 squared minus 4 times a, so a is 3, times c, and c is 2. So I have negative 4 squared is going to be positive 16, and then 4 times 3 times 2 is going to be 24. So 16 minus 24 is negative 8, which is less than 0. So what that tells me, if my discriminant is less than 0, it tells me that I have 2 imaginary solutions and no real solutions. So the problem says to find the real solutions, which I can now say that this particular quadratic equation has no real solutions. And I don't even have to do the quadratic formula because I already know that there aren't any real solutions to this particular problem. All right, let's try another one. 3x squared minus 5x plus 1 is equal to 0. This one is in the correct form. It's set equal to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and make a list. My a value is going to be 3. That's the number in front of the x squared. My b value is going to be negative 5. That's the number in front of the x. And my c value is going to be 1. And I'm going to check my discriminant first. So I'm going to go ahead and do the calculation for b squared minus 4ac. So plugging in for b, I'm going to plug in a negative 5 and square it. Minus 4 times a, so 4 times 3, times the c value of 1. So negative 5 squared is 25. 4 times 3 times 1 is going to be 12. And so my discriminant is equal to 13, which is a positive number. It's greater than 0. So looking back at my notes, if I have a discriminant greater than 0, that tells me that I expect to have 2 real solutions. So now I know that I can proceed with my quadratic formula. All right, so first I'm going to write my formula down, and then I'm going to work on plugging in. All right, so let's plug our numbers into the quadratic formula. So the first thing I'm going to plug in is for the b. So I'm going to be really careful here. I'm going to erase the b, and in place of the b, I'm going to put a negative 5. Now, the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, I already know that that's equal to 13. I've already calculated that. So, I guess we could recalculate it, but there's really not any point in doing that. I'm just going to erase this entire part and plug in the 13 from my calculation up here. And then on the bottom, 2 times a, I'm going to erase the a, and I'm going to plug in a 3. So now we can look at simplifying things. We have a negative 5, which is going to become positive. And then on the bottom, I have 2 times 3, which will be 6. And so actually right now I'm done. I do have 2 real answers because I have one with a positive and one with a negative. So if you wanted to write it out, you could say that one solution is 5 plus the square root of 13 over 6. And a second solution is going to be 5 minus the square root of 13 over 6. And so these are the 2 real solutions that we were told we would have based on our discriminant. All right, so let's look at one final example. So we want the real solutions for 25x squared minus 60x is equal to negative 36. And so again, on this case, I need to set it equal to 0 before I start. So I'm going to add the 36 to both sides. So I'm going to have 25x squared minus 60x plus 36 is equal to 0. So looking at this, I know that the a value, the number in front of my x squared, is 25. My b value, the number in front of the x, is negative 60. And my c value is 36. So before we do quadratic formula, let's check the discriminant. So b squared, I'm going to have negative 60 squared minus 4 times a, so 4 times 25, times c, which is 36. So negative 60 squared is 3600, And 4 times 25 times 36 is also 3,600. And so when we subtract them, we get 0 for our discriminant. So looking back, if we get 0 for our discriminant, we know that we're going to have one real solution. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and do our quadratic formula. So let's plug in. So again, I'm going to be careful with the b. In place of the b, I'm going to put in a negative 60. Now for the discriminant, the b squared minus 4ac, I already know that that is 0. I've already calculated it. So again, there's really not a reason to recalculate that. I'm just going to put my 0 in. And then 2a, in place of the a, I'm going to put 25. So we have x is equal to negative 60, which is going to be positive. The square root of 0 is just going to be 0, so I'm going to drop that off here. And then 2 times 25 on the bottom is going to be 50. And so as we simplify that, we're going to end up with 6 over 5. Remember that we only were expecting to have one answer to this quadratic equation.